My name's Daniel. I'm a freshman at George Washington University, and I actually come from the other Washington, Washington State. What happens in this Washington? What small changes or even big changes can happen in Congress to allow communication and the stopping of gridlock?
There's something very impersonal about things now. It's texting, tweeting, no face-to-face, no flesh-on-flesh, and that's part of it. The other part was where it started, at least to me. The venom started in the House. It was when you have one legislative body, this is not a partisan statement, it would be the same with Republicans, where you had a House of Representatives under the control of one party for 40 years. And in that 40 years, the majority finally just wiped out the minority, or the minority guy would put in an amendment and the staff would look at it and say, hey, the chairman will like that, so he's going to put his name on it and you'll have to do another press release and shift for yourself. So they left the House to go to the Senate. The people who had been mistreated in the minority came to the Senate, say we can't stand the House anymore. Even the masters got tired of beating the slaves, and they would come over to the Senate. And when they came, they'd say, you know, boy, we've had enough of Democrats over there, or Republicans, and I could name the names of guys who came from the House, both parties, and brought the venom with them. That was in my time. I saw that. And as far as, it's just if you don't know someone, you don't trust them. If you haven't shared time with them and tell them about what they love and who they are, you don't ever have an element of affection or regard or trust.
Alan Simpson earlier in the program talked about personal relationships. And, you know, even though a lot of politics and government are analytic and numbers and so on, there is no substitute for that kind of personal relationship. I mean, you've done a good job of trying to get people mixed up on your program, for example, but so little of that happens. You know, it's just terrible. It's really terrible. You know, members of Congress are never here in Washington. They're never here. You know, they're raising money or they're here for a day and a half. And Tip O'Neill used to have a rule that we'd be in Washington for 3 weeks and he could be off for a week. And that was very well enforced, and that made people get to know each other, and their kids were going to school together and that kind of stuff. And that's where I got to know Alan, really, was even though he was from a neighboring state, we got to know each other at dinners. That was the first and most important time. And anyway, it was a very important part of this personalismo in politics.
Given the importance of personal relationships so that you can communicate, so that you can establish some level of trust, so that you can broker deals and you can negotiate and feel that the other side is going to honor whatever is agreed to. As you look at Washington, if you could wave your magic wand, what do you think should be done, or what are some possible solutions to those challenges?
Well, I'm a believer that the single biggest cancer invading the place is campaign finance. I mean, the fact that members of Congress have to raise such an enormous amount of money puts the greatest premium on them to spend their time raising money. They're not legislators anymore. They're part-time people in Washington. They spend more time raising money. Now, why is that? You know, that's because the campaign finance rules have changed so dramatically with the Supreme Court's decision and with the injection into politics of just an enormous flow of dollars. So to be competitive, you've got to spend a huge amount of time raising more and more money. That's one problem, the time that it takes. Second, if you don't do it, you know, you're going to get hammered by all the constituencies that Simpson and Bowles and company have been talking about. And third, what happens is that people get afraid. People in the legislative branch get afraid of doing anything, because if they act and take a controversial position on something, there's going to be a huge amount of money spent against them. So what's the easiest thing to do? Do nothing. So that has also led to, you know, this paralysis.
And I don't mean to be a pessimist, but is it fair to say that campaign finance and the rules and regulations, the structure, is more of an inside baseball kind of game. Issues that people in Washington care about, people who run for office and manage campaigns care about, but the general public doesn't really pay that much attention to.
Until Citizens United, until a Supreme Court decision, until I said that a corporation is a person. People sat up and say, what's that all about? Right? So I think for the first time, we've broken through. You're absolutely right. To talk about campaign finance is one of the most anesthetizing things you could do in politics. People just not, that's someplace else. But now, I think the idea of the court's actions and this huge flow of money going into politics, coupled with, I think, a real sense of equity in the country. The little guy, what's the 99% all about? What's the people feeling that the game is rigged? And you know what? It is rigged. The game is rigged for the people who can spend a huge amount of time on politics, who can protect the financial institutions, who can make sure that the fossil fuel industry is still getting enormous subsidies. One of the biggest issues that we have in the country is that the little people are feeling more and more and more distant from their government, alienated from their government, and we'll see what happens. I think that, you look at the next generation. If I were to wave my wand, if I were to spend another career in this, I would start focused on organizing young people around the issue of a sustainable democracy. And what's their future going to look like without that? What's their future going to look like without the capacity to buy a house and not live in their parents' house? What's their future going to be in terms of job advancement? What's their future going to be in terms of equity in the education system, which doesn't exist now? Public universities used to be tremendous ladders of advancement. That's less and less true all the time. There are issues of the survival of a democratic society and the thriving of a democratic society that I think are ones around which we have an opportunity would have an opportunity to really organize a next generation of citizen activists. I think we're going to get to that point.
There's more of the Aaron Harber Show after this. Coming up next.
Inflation will kick in and interest rates will go up, and guess who will get hurt the worst? The little guy that everybody talks about, all parties, everybody, the little guy, the most vulnerable in society.